Crime in the Elizabethan era was very different from modern day. The crimes, if observed by modern day people, would be thought as very silly, and the punishments would be thought to be over the top. Crime was split into three categories: treason, felonies, and misdemeanors. Additionally, treason was split into two categories: high treason and petty treason. High treason was when someone threatened the life of the people in power or sabotaged the rules constructed by the monarchy. Punishments for high treason is the most gruesome of all. The person who committed this act would be drawn, hanged, and quartered. To go more into detail about this punishment, the person would be dragged by a horse to where they will be hung until half dead. Then, they would go to the execution place where they would be disemboweled, take out their intestines, and after that they would be quartered, cut into 4 pieces. Quartering is either done physically by a knife, or 4 pieces of their body, arms and legs, would be tied around each horse, and the horses would go in the opposite direction, ripping apart the person into 4 sections. High treason punishments were all done publicly. In fact, the south end of the London Bridge still displays heads on a stick from the executions that took place in this era. Petty treason is when someone threatens a person whom they are supposed to show obedience to. Remember, in this era, women were not equal to men. Therefore, if a woman were to commit an act that is unforgiving to her superior, in other words, her husband, the punishment would be death. Usually the punishment for this act would be burning at the stake. Petty treason can also be done by a servant not being obedient to their master. The next category after treason are felonies. Felonies are when someone commits murder, assault, witchcraft, or property crimes such as robbery. Other peculiar crimes that fits under felonies were hunting at night. The penalty for most cases of felonies would be death. Executions would be done publicly, like being hanged, for example. Some felony cases would be lessened to a smaller punishment, like cutting off fingers, although usually they would cut something a little less essential, like someone's ears. Ironically, since public executions are wildly popular, many pickpocketers are drawn in by the large crowds. The final category of crime is misdemeanors. Misdemeanors is everything other than the crimes talked about in treason and felonies. A couple examples of misdemeanors would be petty theft and vagabondage, which is people who travel from place to place. Petty theft is theft under 12 pence, and the punishments for petty theft would be branding the letter T on thumbs to show that they are a person who have stolen before. Usually the branding helps judges to see if the person has committed the act before. People who wander from place to place is usually run after by town officials. Typically, convicted misdemeanor crimes would be punished by being restrained in stocks publicly, and this usually can greatly hurt them by other people in town who wish to hurt them. Another common punishment for some facing misdemeanors is someone getting publicly whipped. Other crimes that were considered misdemeanors were wandering drunk, which led to stocks or wearing a barrel. If someone were to cheat a customer, they would either face a pillory, stocks, or finger pillory, which was a piece of wood that slammed in the middle of a person's joint. Gossiping was dealt with by placing a cage contraption around someone's head, forcing metal spikes to go inside someone's mouth. Any movement can cause severe injury inside the mouth. Over-talkative woman was shockingly a crime in this era, and the punishment sentence of this crime would be a chair where the woman sat with a lever to control the ducking tool, as they liked to call it back then. The woman would be lowered into water, and in some cases, the woman would drown. Although misdemeanors had many crimes to fit, the punishments are better than death.
Punishments, crimes, and laws also varied based on personal social status. They were split into 2 classes, nobles and commoners. Nobles could be granted trial and plead in front of a judge with the possibility of being let go with a bail, fine, or lighter punishment. Commoners, however, were usually immediately taken to a holding cell where they would wait to be punished, in front of an audience for entertainment or in private. However, there were also laws for extremely poor commoners. This social class usually left them to be humiliated, whipped, and beaten if they were caught asking for money or goods. Because lawyers were expensive and exclusive, most commoners could not afford them, and they were reserved specifically for nobles. The Elizabethan court system was a complicated and intricate one. The system of law was divided into two sections, civil and common. Each of these branches was also divided into either canon, statute, customary, or salic laws. Courts dealt with the offenders based on severity and geographic proximity. There were local, manorial, national, criminal, consistorial, and maritime courts. Civil law was the set of rules that dealt with non-criminal matters like domestic problems, contractual issues, etc. Common law dealt with criminal matters like theft, murder, treason, etc. Within these branches, there were the canon, statute, customary, and salic laws. These were different sets of rules that were written by different groups. For example, canon law was a set of laws written by the church leadership that helped govern their members and followers. The courts were also very different from modern court systems. The courts met either twice a year, which were called assizes, or 4 times a year, which were called general court or sessions. More important cases were taken care of in assizes, while court or sessions dealt with lesser crimes and regulated by lower-level officials. The assizes in particular were known for dealing out very harsh and painful punishments. However, again, only nobles were granted and could afford trials at all. Commoners rarely could gain the financial stability and social stability to be given the gift of trial. These trials were usually overseen by the queen, and as such, the court buildings were mobile and wherever the queen happened to be. However, pettier crimes such as begging, vagabondage, theft under £5, and other small felonies could be dealt with by lower officials in either a beadle court, manor court, town court, or petty sessions court. Usually these crimes were dealt with through a small fine or lower punishment like the stocks. Elizabethan justice systems could be seen as very prejudiced by modern people. Punishment, accommodations, and cells while on trial were all dependent on your social status and/or wealth. Jails in Shakespeare's time had many different sections. Unlike today, these sections were based not on safety or the type of crime, rather they were based on how much money a prisoner could pay to live in the cell. Most poor people who were put into jail were put into the section called the hole. Keep in mind, many poor people were simply punished on the spot. The ones who received jail accommodations were usually waiting for their chance of punishment. The common hole in most jails put dozens of prisoners into a very small space with no availability to exercise, sanitation, or clean clothing. There was an extreme lack of food, as what was provided came through charities and was often rotten or unhealthy. Many of the poor died in these cells within days or weeks. On the contrary, nobles who were in jail could buy their way to a high-class cell, purchase fine meals and clothing, as well as alcohol and tobacco. In fact, a noble with enough money could bribe their way out of jail completely. The higher class would stay in these conditions until they stopped paying enough money. Then they were moved into another area, which was still comfortable but less luxurious, and eventually ended up in the hole with the poor. Because jail times were not specific, meaning 2 people committing the same crime could get out of jail years apart, some nobles eventually ran out of ways to bribe the jail staff and were moved to the hole. Jails were often used as holding places for people awaiting trial or punishment, and if the court designated to the person's case was full in that session, the person remained in jail until they could plead.
There are many executions that took place in the Elizabethan era, as it was a regular form of punishment. There was the case of Anne Boleyn and her associates, Catherine Howard, Henry Howard, Thomas Cromwell, Lady Jane Grey, Jane Boleyn, and Mary Queen of Scots. All were very famous, but they were very controversial and problematic at the time. Bloody Mary, daughter of King Henry VIII, had also given many executions to the common people, as seen by her given title. Anne Boleyn was a young lady-in-waiting to King Henry VIII's wife when she stole his heart. He was married to Catherine of Aragon at the time, but he was dissatisfied as she did not produce the male heir that he had desired. In 1533, he married Anne and filed for divorce a year later. She didn't give him a son in the first few years of marriage and was very quickly enticed by Jane Seymour. Soon he formulated a plan with Thomas Cromwell, the head of the court, to get rid of Anne. They eventually accused her of adultery with several men, including her brother. However, the charge seemed to be false as there was no evidence to support the convictions. Unfortunately, Cromwell was the highest ranking in court, and she was later deemed guilty. Anne Boleyn was beheaded in May of 1536,